That's my wife, Clara, over there. The one with her head thrown back, laughing. The sound is like wind chimes. It's a sound I never thought I'd hear again, let alone be the reason for. The ring on her finger used to be my father's. A simple gold signet ring. It's a little too big for her, but she refuses to have it resized. A reminder, she says. A reminder of the day a complete stranger grabbed my hand in the middle of a wedding reception, looked me dead in the eye with pure, undiluted panic, and whispered, "Act like you know me." So I did. And that's how Leo Maxwell, a 34-year-old building superintendent who lived in a basement apartment and spoke to roughly 4 people a week, ended up engaged to a woman I'd never met. Let me back up. Before Clara, my life was a series of quiet, predictable loops. Wake up, check the boiler, fix a leaky faucet in 3B, unclog a drain in 5A, go back to my basement apartment, eat, sleep, repeat. I was a ghost in my own building. People knew me as a useful, quiet man who could make the rattling in their radiator stop. They didn't know my last name. They didn't know my favorite food or the fact that I read history books about ancient Rome before bed. And I liked it that way. It was safe. It was numb. 3 years earlier, I'd been a different person. I'd been a son. My dad, Michael, was my whole world. He was a mechanic, a man whose hands were always stained with grease, but whose advice was always clean and true. We weren't just father and son. We were best friends. We'd work on his old Ford Falcon on weekends, the radio playing classic rock, his laughter echoing in the garage. He had these sayings, little bits of wisdom he'd drop like spare washers into a tin can. One of them stuck with me more than any other. "Leo," he'd said one afternoon, wiping his hands on a rag, "you can tell the real measure of a man by one thing. Not by his job, not by his money. You tell it by what he does for a stranger. What he gives when there's nothing in it for him, when no one's even watching." He called it the stranger test. Then a heart attack, sudden, violent, took him in an instant, and it took me with him. The color drained out of my world. The laughter stopped. The garage fell silent. I sold the Falcon because I couldn't bear to look at it. I took the job as a superintendent because it came with a place to live and required very little human interaction. I switched myself off. I stopped wanting things. I stopped feeling things. I was just maintenance, a human version of a fuse box, functional, necessary, but hidden away in the dark. Which is how I ended up at that wedding. My friend, Mark, owned the venue, a beautiful old converted barn. His generator was acting up, and he was in a panic. He called me, the one guy he knew who could fix anything without making a fuss. I went as a favor. I found the fault, a loose connection, simple as that. Fixed it and was trying to slip out the back without having to talk to anyone. I was almost at the door. Freedom. Then a hand, surprisingly strong, clamped down on my wrist. "Act like you know me." I turned. She was beautiful, but that wasn't the first thing I noticed. The first thing I noticed was the terror in her eyes. It was a specific kind of terror I recognized. The look of an animal caught in a trap, trying not to show it. She was wearing a deep blue dress, and her dark hair was pinned up, but a few strands had escaped, framing a face that was pale with dread. I followed her gaze. A man was approaching. He was tall, handsome in that slick, expensive way. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He moved like he owned the place, like he owned everyone in it. The charming bully. You know the type. "Clara, darling," he said. His voice a smooth, possessive purr. "I've been looking all over for you." The woman, Clara, tightened her grip on my hand. She turned to him, forcing a smile that was brittle enough to shatter. "Julian," she said, "I was just catching up with my fiancé." "My what?" My brain went completely blank. All the circuits blew at once. The man, Julian, looked at me, his eyes flicking down to my work boots, my plain gray shirt, my calloused hands. A slow, condescending smirk spread across his face. "Your fiancé?" he repeated, drawing the word out. "You've been busy." Clara squeezed my hand, A silent, desperate plea. And my dad's voice echoed in my head. What he does for a stranger. I slid my arm around her waist, pulling her slightly closer. Felt surprisingly natural. Leo, I said, extending my free hand to Julian. Nice to meet you. Julian looked at my hand like it was something he'd scraped off his shoe. He ignored it. You must be the one she's been hiding, he said to me, but his eyes were locked on her. I have to say, Clara, I'm surprised. This isn't your usual type. My type is a kind man, Julian, she said, her voice shaking only slightly. Something you wouldn't understand. His smile tightened. We'll see how long that lasts. He gave her one last, lingering look that was more of a threat than a glance, and then he turned and melted back into the crowd. Clara deflated against me, her whole body trembling. She let go of my hand as if it had suddenly become red hot. I am so sorry, she whispered, not looking at me. I had no right. I panicked. It's okay, I said. It was the first full sentence I'd spoken to her. My voice sounded rusty. I can explain. We found a small, quiet table in the corner, away from the music and the dancing. She explained. The wedding was for her younger sister, Amelia. Julian was her ex-boyfriend. A very rich, very powerful, very controlling ex-boyfriend who refused to accept that they were over. But it was more complicated than that. A few years ago, her sister Amelia had gotten incredibly sick. A rare autoimmune disorder triggered by environmental contaminants. She'd almost died. The medical bills were astronomical, enough to bankrupt their entire family for generations. The source of the contaminants? A chemical plant on the edge of town. A plant owned by Julian's family. His family had quietly, privately paid for all of Amelia's treatment. They'd saved her life. But it came with a price. A non-disclosure agreement thicker than a phone book. If Clara's family ever spoke a word about the plant's role in Amelia's illness, Julian's family would not only sue them into oblivion but would also find a way to retroactively stick them with the full, multimillion-dollar medical debt. Julian was the gatekeeper of that secret. He'd used it to control Clara for years. Their relationship had been a gilded cage. He was publicly charming, the town's golden boy who had saved her sister. Privately, he was a monster of emotional manipulation. When she finally found the courage to leave him, he didn't take it well. Now he was here at her sister's wedding trying to corner her, trying to remind her of the power he held, trying to force her back into his life by threatening the one thing she cared about more than anything, her sister's fragile peace and health. My family, they don't see it, she said, her voice low and full of pain. They just see the man whose family saved Amelia. They think I'm being ungrateful, difficult. They keep telling me to just make nice with him, for the family's sake. They have no idea what he's really like. She was completely alone in it. She was carrying this impossible burden to protect her sister, and the world just saw her as the villain, the difficult one, the one who was throwing away a perfect man. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the quiet strength in the set of her jaw. She wasn't a damsel in distress. She was a soldier holding a defensive line all by herself. So you needed a fiancé, I said. A shield. She nodded, looking down at her hands. It was a stupid, desperate move. He had me cornered. I saw you by the door. You looked quiet. You looked like you didn't want to be here either. I'm sorry I dragged you into it. I thought about my basement apartment. The silence. The gray, predictable loops. For the first time in 3 years, I felt a flicker of something other than numb. Purpose. The stranger test. The job's not finished, I said. She looked up, confused. What? He's still here. The wedding isn't over. If your fiancé suddenly disappears, it makes you look like a liar and gives him the win. I took a breath. So, for the rest of the night, I'm your fiancé. We'll give him a good show. A tear welled in her eye and she hastily wiped it away. Why would you do that? My dad had a thing about helping strangers, I said simply. A small, genuine smile finally touched her lips. It was like the sun breaking through clouds. Okay, fiancé. What's our story? And so we started inventing. In the corner of that loud, joyful wedding, we built a life. It started as a joke, a necessary fiction. Where did we meet? She asked, a glint of humor in her eyes now. At the library, I said immediately. You're a librarian, right? She blinked. How did you know that? You have a tiny smudge of ink on your thumb, and you keep straightening the salt and pepper shakers so their labels are perfectly aligned. She laughed, a real laugh this time. Okay, so we met at the library. What happened? There was a flood, I improvised, warming to the task. A pipe burst in the archives. I was the super for the building next door and got called in because the on-call guy was on vacation. Water everywhere. You were in a panic, trying to save a box of rare first editions. And you, my hero, she picked up, playing along, waded through the water and single-handedly rescued a first edition of Moby Dick. It was The Count of Monte Cristo, I corrected her gently. It's a better book. She raised an eyebrow. A superintendent who reads Dumas? You're full of surprises, Leo. So are you, Clara. We kept going. We invented our first date, a terrible Italian restaurant where the waiter spilled wine on me. We invented our first argument. I put a book back on the wrong shelf. We invented the moment we fell in love, sitting on a park bench, not saying anything at all. And the proposal? She asked, her voice softer now. I instinctively touched the chain around my neck. Tucked under my shirt was my father's old signet ring. I'd worn it every day since he died. I pulled it out. This was my dad's, I said. I gave it to you on that same park bench. It's a placeholder. Until we find something you really love. I slid it onto her finger. It was too big, but she curled her finger to hold it in place. She stared at it, her expression unreadable. It's beautiful, she whispered. Somewhere in the inventing, the strangest thing happened. We stopped inventing. We just started talking. She told me about her dream of opening a small bookstore for children. I told her about my dad's old Ford Falcon and how much I missed the smell of grease and gasoline. She told me about the pressure from her family. I told her about the suffocating quiet of my apartment. I was talking more than I had in 3 years combined. I was feeling more. That protective wall I'd built around myself, brick by careful brick, was starting to crumble. Then came the moment I truly saw her. A little kid, no older than 5, came running by our table, chasing another. He tripped, and his entire cup of bright red punch went flying, right onto the skirt of Clara's beautiful blue dress. The boy froze, his eyes wide with horror. He was about to burst into tears. His mother came rushing over, her face a mask of frantic apology and impending scolding. Oh, honey, no. Look what you did. I am so sorry, the mother said, grabbing the boy's arm. But before she could say another word, Clara knelt, wincing as the fabric stuck to her skin. She ignored the stain completely. She looked right at the terrified little boy and gave him a warm, gentle smile. Hey, it's okay, she said softly. It's just a dress. And you know what? Now we match, she pointed to the red splotches. We're polka dot twins. The little boy's lip trembled, but then a tiny giggle escaped. Clara reached out and gently wiped a tear from his cheek. No harm done, she said to the mother, who was still stammering apologies. Go have fun. The mother led the boy away, looking at Clara with pure gratitude. Clara stood up and looked at the huge red stain on her dress. She sighed, but there was no anger in it, no frustration, only a quiet acceptance. No one else had really paid attention. It was a small, insignificant moment in a room full of noise and celebration. But I saw it. I saw her grace, her innate, unthinking kindness to the smallest, most vulnerable person in the room, even when she herself was under siege. She was protecting that little boy's feelings in the same fierce, quiet way she was protecting her sister. That was it for me. The stranger test. In that moment, she stopped being a stranger I was helping. She just became Clara. And I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that I would do anything to keep that quiet strength in her from being broken. My resolve was tested sooner than I expected. Julian appeared at our table again, a glass of champagne in his hand. He leaned against an empty chair, the picture of casual arrogance. "Having fun, you two?" he asked, his gaze sweeping over our corner. "Hiding away from the party. Just catching our breath," Clara said, her voice even. Julian's eyes landed on the ring on her finger. My father's ring. His lip curled in a sneer. "Is that the ring?" he asked. "Charming. Very rustic," he looked at me. "So, Leo, a superintendent. Tell me, what's the 5-year plan for a man in your position? Bigger basements? More impressive leaks?" He was baiting me, trying to make me look small, trying to prove to Clara that she was settling for a nobody. The old me, the numb me, would have said nothing. The angry me, the one I buried with my dad, wanted to stand up and put him through a wall. But the me that had just watched Clara comfort a crying child did something else. I just smiled. A calm, easy smile. "The plan is to be happy, Julian," I said. "And to make sure she is," I reached over and took her hand, the one with the ring. "That's the whole plan. The rest is just details." My calm completely disarmed him. It wasn't the reaction he wanted. He wanted a fight. He wanted me to get defensive, to puff out my chest. He didn't know how to handle quiet certainty. He sneered again, took a sip of his champagne and said, "Good luck with that," before stalking off. Clara looked at me, her eyes wide. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Stay so calm. He's an expert at pushing buttons, and you just defused him." "I fix things for a living," I said with a shrug. "People, machines, they're not that different. You just have to find the loose connection." The night wore on. The speeches began. The maid of honor, Amelia, gave a beautiful, heartfelt toast to her sister. She looked healthy and happy, and I saw Clara watching her with so much love it was almost painful. Then, the best man finished his speech, and the master of ceremonies came back to the microphone. "And now, a special toast from a dear friend of the family, Mr. Julian Croft." My blood ran cold. Clara stiffened beside me. Julian walked to the stage, oozing charisma. He took the microphone and smiled out at the crowd, a practiced political smile. "To the happy couple," he began, raising his glass, "and to family. Family is everything. It's about being there for each other, through thick and thin. It's about forgiveness," he paused, his eyes finding Clara in the crowd. "It's about knowing when to forgive someone for making a mistake, for straying, and welcoming them back home where they belong." The room was silent. It wasn't a toast. It was a threat, a public declaration of ownership. He was painting her as a flighty woman who had made a mistake leaving him, and himself as the magnanimous hero ready to take her back. Her family was nodding along, smiling sadly. They were buying it completely. I felt a surge of pure, white-hot anger. He was twisting her sacrifice into a weakness. He was doing it in front of everyone she loved. After the toast, the music started up for the first dance. As the bride and groom swayed on the floor, Julian made his move. He strode directly toward our table, his purpose clear. He was going to corner her, use the momentum from his speech to press his advantage. He reached her before I could stand up. He grabbed her arm, not gently. "We need to talk, Clara," he hissed, his voice low and menacing, the charming facade gone. I saw the panic flash in her eyes again, the trapped look. And that was it. My dad's voice again. But this time it wasn't just a memory. It was an instruction. Protect the stranger. I stood up. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I walked calmly over to them. Julian was so focused on Clara, he didn't see me coming until I was right there. I didn't say a word to him. I didn't even look at him. I gently placed my hand over his on Clara's arm. My hands are rough. They're superintendent hands, strong from years of turning wrenches and hauling equipment. He felt it. He looked up, startled. I still didn't look at him. My eyes were on Clara. I gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I believe," I said, my voice quiet but clear enough for both of them to hear. This is our dance. With my other hand, I took hers, and I gently but firmly peeled his fingers off her arm. It was not a fight. It was a transfer of ownership, but not of a person. It was a transfer of the moment. He was no longer in control of it. He was left standing there, his hand empty, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. I led Clara onto the dance floor. The bride and groom were just finishing their dance, and a slow, simple love song started to play. I put one hand on her waist and took her other hand in mine. She was trembling like a leaf. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She rested her head against my chest. "I thought I was going to be sick." "Just breathe," I said, my voice rumbling in my chest where her ear was resting. "I've got you." We swayed to the music. I'm not a dancer. I fix things. But for those 3 minutes, I held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And in that moment I could feel her heart beating against my ribs, slowly returning to a normal rhythm. I could feel the tension draining out of her shoulders. Section, I was just a quiet man in work boots, dancing with the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt solid, real. As the song ended, I saw the narrative cracking. People had seen the exchange. They saw Julian's aggressive grab. They saw my quiet intervention. They saw the look of profound relief on Clara's face as I led her away. They saw her lean against me on the dance floor not with passion, but with trust. Julian was no longer the charming hero. He was the angry ex. I was no longer the strange, lowly fiancé. I was the protector. Clara's father, a stern-looking man I'd been avoiding all night, walked up to us as we left the dance floor. He looked at me, his eyes assessing. "I saw that," he said, his voice gruff. He looked from me to his daughter, and a flicker of understanding crossed his face. "You handled that well, son." It was the first crack in the wall, the first sign that someone was finally, truly seeing her. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Julian left shortly after, defeated. We stayed, talking with her family. I answered questions about my job, about our life together. I didn't lie, not really. I just told them about my quiet life, and they filled in the romantic blanks themselves. With every passing conversation, I could feel the family's perception of Clara shifting, softening. They were seeing her through my eyes now. When it was all over, when the music had faded and the guests had gone, we stood outside the barn in the cool night air. The pretense was over. The show was done. She turned to me, my father's ring still on her finger. "Leo," she started, her voice full of a heavy finality. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved me tonight." "You were saving yourself," I said. "I just held the shield for a bit." She slipped the ring off her finger and held it out to me. "Thank you for this, too." My heart sank. This was it. Back to the basement. Back to the silence. I didn't take the ring. "Keep it," I said. She looked confused. "Why? We're done. You can go back to your life." "I don't want to," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. They were the truest words I'd spoken in 3 years. "I don't want to go back to my life. Not the one I had before tonight." I took a breath. This was it. "Clara, none of this was pretend for me. Not the important parts. The part where I saw how kind you were to that little boy. The part where I wanted to protect you from that bully. The part where I held you on the dance floor." I looked her straight in the eye. "That was all real. Being your fake fiancé tonight made me feel more real than I have since my dad died. I don't want to go back to being a ghost." Tears were streaming down her face now, silent and silver in the moonlight. "It was real for me too," she whispered. She looked down at the ring in her palm. "When you stood up to him, no one has ever done that for me. Ever. Everyone always just tells me to be reasonable, to not make waves." She finally told me everything then. The full weight of the NDA. The constant, crushing fear that one wrong move would ruin her family and her sister's future. the incredible loneliness of it all. It was a confession, a transfer of trust. She was handing me the truth of her life, and it was heavier than any toolbox I'd ever carried. I just listened. When she was done, I took the ring from her hand, and I gently slid it back onto her finger. "Let's keep pretending for a little while longer," I said, "and see if it becomes real." She nodded, a watery, hopeful smile breaking through the tears. "Okay, fiancé, let's see." We didn't have to pretend for long. About 6 weeks later, the story broke. An investigative journalist, working on a completely separate tip, published a massive exposé on Julian's family company. Turned out Amelia wasn't the only one. There were dozens of cases, a whole community poisoned by their negligence. A cover-up that went back years. The world saw the truth. A class action lawsuit was filed. The NDAs were all declared void under criminal investigation. Julian and his father were disgraced. Clara was vindicated. Her family was safe. She never had to fire a single shot. The truth had done the work for her. Her family finally understood. They saw the monster they had been asking her to appease, and they saw the quiet, steady man who had stood by her side. The apologies were tearful and heartfelt. The healing began. And for us, the pretense fell away, and what was left was something solid and true. Our life began to build one real memory at a time. At 1 month, we invented our first real date. We went to that terrible Italian restaurant from our fake story. The waiter did, in fact, spill wine on me. We laughed so hard we cried. At 6 months, we invented moving in together. She brought box after box of books into my apartment. It wasn't a basement anymore. It was filled with stories and light. It was our home. At 1 year, on the anniversary of the wedding where we met, I took her back to the old barn. It was quiet, empty, smelling of old wood and hay. I got down on one knee. I took her hand and slipped my father's ring off her finger. I pulled a small box from my pocket. Inside was a simple, delicate ring with a single small sapphire, the color of her dress that night. "This is the one you love," I said, my voice thick. "But I hope you'll still wear the placeholder sometimes, too." She was crying, laughing. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Leo. Of course." And that's how I got here. Standing in our backyard, watching my wife laugh with her sister, who is happy and healthy. I walked into that wedding a ghost. A man who just fixed things. A quiet superintendent living in the dark. I saw a woman in trouble, and I thought I was doing the heroic thing. I thought I was living up to my father's code. I thought I was saving her. But I was so wrong. I see that now. I wasn't the one doing the saving. Clara saved me. She grabbed my hand, and she didn't just pull me into a lie for the night. She pulled me out of the basement. She pulled me out of the silence. She pulled me back into the world, back into the light. She brought the color back. Sometimes the people who look like they need rescuing are actually the strongest ones you'll ever meet. They're the lighthouses, holding steady in the storm, just waiting for someone to finally see their light. It's so easy to believe the story the world tells you about a person. It's harder, and so much more important, to stop and learn the truth for yourself. My dad always said you can tell the measure of a man by what he does for a stranger. He was right. That one act, that one choice to step in changed everything. But he left out the best part. Sometimes, if you're very, very lucky, that stranger saves you right back.